Hi, I'm Joan Cartan-Hansen. Thank you for joining us for this Dialogue Web Extra with Idaho Senior Senator Mike Crapo. We have 5 people standing on the phone lines. Let's go ahead and get to them. Let's try Jerome in Wallace.
Okay, that's me.
Go ahead, sir.
Well, my question is this: we hear all this talk about jobs, and it's very plain now that what Richard Gebhardt said 25 years ago when they were arguing free trade and fair trade, that he said if we go for free trade over fair trade, the results of the middle class in the United States will disappear in a couple of generations. And it's coming true, because this free trade has been a complete loser for us and those foreign countries with the cheap labor. The United States Congress voted the jobs out of Idaho, not only Idaho, but the United States quite a few years ago, and until they repeal free trade, like they were able to repeal the Glass-Steagall Act, which broke the country in the last 10 years. Why can't they repeal this free trade so they can put our people to work?
Let's let the senator get in there.
Good.
I tend to agree with the general tenor of the caller's comments in this sense. We cannot have just free trade agreements. We've got to have fair trade agreements. And I have said consistently that over the years, the United States has been terrible at negotiating trade agreements that were fair to the American people. That's why I voted against NAFTA, and that's why I've opposed several other of our major free trade agreements. Not because I don't believe we should negotiate trade agreements. I think we should. But we should be sure that we don't just continue to give away the store in the negotiations. I think America has been getting better at it. And I do believe that we should move forward with free trade agreements, but with an understanding that we only do free trade agreements that are free and fair to the American people.
All right, thank you, Jerome. Let's go to, let me get the next caller, Dennis in Rathdrum. Dennis, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Will there be specific debating concerning the NPR and PBS funding this week? I know the senator or congressman that is pushing to erase their whole budget is wrong. We would even be able to be watching you tonight.
I take your question with trepidation, knowing that we have a definite conflict of interest in this particular area. But
I know.
we want to be fair and ask the question.
That's a very good question. And first of all, the debate you're talking about is in the House, not the Senate this week or this coming week. And so I can't really tell you how that will play out. The House usually has relatively short debates compared to the Senate particularly. And so I would expect that you will see some debate in the House next week on this, but I don't expect it to be a long or protracted debate. When the House proposal gets to the Senate, if it includes those kinds of provisions or others, whatever that it includes, it will definitely then run into the Senate procedures where, particularly with the Senate under control of a different party than that which controls the House, you'll see a much, I think, longer, slower view of this taken and a longer, more robust debate. I can't predict what will be in that debate because I really don't know what's going to come out of the House or what the Senate leadership will allow to come to the Senate floor. But these issues will all get a full hearing, at least in the Senate, if not a shorter one in the House.
Now, the Bipartisan Commission report proposed elimination of the Corporation of Public Broadcasting in its proposal.
Well, yes and no. What happened with the Bipartisan Commission's report is they created that straitjacket that I was talking about,
right,
and that was the binding part of the report. The remaining part of the report was options that could be considered by Congress to meet those targets.
Right.
And there were hundreds of billions of dollars of options put into the report. And so although that was one of the things that was put into the report, one of the reasons that I was able to support the report, even though it included a lot of things that I don't support, was that it took the approach that I talked about earlier. It created the straitjacket and then lets Congress get into the details. I will say, I think that NPR, like all other programs, has to be on the table, but everything, like I said in other parts of the program, has to be on the table, and then let Congress decide where that balance is.
Okay. And thank you, Dennis, for your call. Let's get to, if I get that other, Catherine in Pocatello. Catherine.
Hi.
Hi, go ahead.
Senator Crapo?
Yes.
I'm very interested in health care because the cost right now to me is running almost $1,000 a month for my husband and myself, and we have Blue Cross. So it's very, very hard for me to understand how even small businesses would be able to pay these costs for their employees. And I don't understand, if we're really serious about health care, why you don't get that anything that you pay as a tax deduction, an automatic tax deduction, rather than having to go to 7.5% over your gross income. It seems to me that would be a very simple place to start to show that people care about health care.
Okay.
And I really do feel that we're still paying for everybody's health care. It's costing me more and more because other people don't have health care.
Let me put you on hold and have you listen to the Senator's answer.
I actually agree with this caller, too. I think the 7.5% limit in our Internal Revenue Code is extremely difficult for most families to meet. Only people in catastrophic circumstances can meet that 7.5%, and they still lose the first 7.5%. So I agree with that. Now, we may end up reforming the income tax code, excuse me, in a way that eliminates many, many different deductions and credits, but dramatically reduces tax rates. And so we may solve this problem in another way. But again, I agree with the caller's comment that right now, the way our law works, including the health care law that we passed last year, we're not really doing much, if anything, to address the rising costs of health care. And with regard to health care insurance premiums, we are actually, by the law we passed last year, driving the cost of insurance up, not down. We've got to start to go in other directions.
One of the interesting things I thought I read in the bipartisan panel's recommendation was the concept of changing your income taxes so that you don't have to keep track of charitable deductions, you don't, all that, your house payment, mortgage, that interest, you just don't do that. Everybody just gets a standard deduction. It would certainly make the form easier.
That was one of the major reforms of the code, or of the commission. And of course, it wasn't done exactly how I would like to do it, but it was largely along the approach that I think we should take, which is to dramatically simplify the Internal Revenue Code and at the same time dramatically reduce tax rates, so that although people would not have the kinds of deductions and credits that they now have, they also would not have the kind of tax rates that they now have. And in the end, they would actually be better off. And the reforms that the Commission proposed, I think, would actually be progressive, meaning that it would give a bigger benefit to people in the lower and middle income categories than it does to those in the upper income categories.
I just imagined, though, thousands of accountants going, because it so dramatically changes how people do their income taxes. Let's get one more caller on here. We've got William in Salmon. William.
Hi, Joan. Thank you very much. And Senator Crapo, thank you for joining us on Dialogue tonight. This concerns the Gulf oil crisis and the upcoming hearings. The other side of the aisle tried to pass a bill in early to mid-fall, I believe, that would call or place the witnesses to this disaster under oath to testify and get the total truth out, yet was defeated by your party in filibuster. Correct me if I'm wrong on this. I would like your comments, sir. Thank you very much.
Well, you know what? I apologize. I am not recalling that vote. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but I wouldn't. I just can't recall the specifics of what may have been included in that proposal. In terms of bringing forward witnesses and putting them under oath, usually that's a decision that is made by the chairman of the committee, and the full Congress or the full Senate doesn't get engaged in those kinds of decisions. Again, if I'm forgetting a time when that was actually brought to the floor for a vote, I apologize. I just don't recall that.
We had an email question from a viewer who wanted to know why you voted to support the increase in fuel taxes for aircrafts.
I'm not sure what the caller is referring to, because that vote hasn't occurred yet in the Senate this Congress. It did pass the Congress last Congress by, I think, 93-0 in the passage of the Federal Aviation Administration reauthorization bill. And what's involved there is a dramatic improvement of our air safety standards. The United States worldwide is falling way behind in terms of our technology and our infrastructure for our air quality, for our air safety standards. And there was an agreed approach to allow for a small increase in the fuel tax so that we could pay for that rather than having other taxes go up to pay for it. And I did support that. There was a battle in that issue over whether that tax should be applied to general aviation or just to the larger airline companies. And I personally believe that it should apply not to general aviation, because they are not the ones for whom the increased costs are being driven. And so in this year, as we move forward, I'm going to be fighting very hard to make sure that that increase is going to be paid by the users of the new system that is created.
Let me throw two more questions at you before we wrap up this Web Extra. One came in from a Facebook viewer who wanted to know about infrastructure questions about roads. The question was, is the price of cutting the deficit giving up federal support for our nation's infrastructure? What are we going to do about our bridges and roads?
Well, there's many parts of our infrastructure, but when you specifically talk about roads and bridges, that is a part of the federal budget that is funded by a separate trust fund, the Highway Trust Fund, that is paid for with gas taxes. Now, we have such need in our roads and bridges that what the need is greater than the amount of revenue that the gas taxes bring in. And so we are looking at whether to supplement that with federal dollars out of the general fund. That's where you get back into these battles over trying to balance the budget and see where we go. The best I can say to the caller is that I strongly believe that our roads, our bridges, and our transportation infrastructure is a key part of our economy, and that we need to do the things that are necessary to make sure we maintain it adequately. I don't know what level of support, if any, that means we need to add to the trust fund from the general fund, but that's got to be a part of that whole process I talked about earlier of setting some targets, creating the budget that Congress must live within, and then applying it to our priorities as the budget allows. And I would say that the Highway Trust Fund and the roads and bridges and that infrastructure is a very high priority.
Would you support raising the federal gas tax to support that trust fund so that the users of gas are actually supporting the infrastructure that's being used?
That's a very tough question, Joan, because I have resisted federal gas tax increases consistently in the past. But let me answer it this way. If it turns out that we feel we need to supplement that trust fund, then I believe the users of the roads and bridges and the highways should be the ones who pay for that increase rather than the general fund. And that would mean that we would need to increase that tax. But I'm not ready to say yet that I'm ready to vote for that. I think we've got to look at other ways to streamline and improve and find savings before we start looking to tax increases anywhere at this point in time.
Within your straitjacket idea, what programs do you have a priority to save or focus on? I'll give that as the last question. What are those? So we have that straitjacket in place. You have to decide where to cut to reach that target. What are your priorities?
Well, my priorities will be infrastructure and the critical safety net programs that we have in place. Let me answer it in a little different way. We talked earlier, nuclear energy, for example, or roads and bridges are another example, and the infrastructure needs to keep our economy strong. But one way I would also answer your question is that, again, as I've said many times, everything has to be on the table. Everything has to be on the table. That includes defense spending and all of the kinds of things that I have really strongly supported in the past. But you can take each one of those areas, transportation, defense, other infrastructure, and we have already identified very serious inefficiencies and excesses in those budgets. And as I answered some earlier questions, I personally believe that we can find major savings in each of these areas without reducing the services, the truly needed services and functions of those budgets. We can get much more efficient and effective, and that's where we should start.
Senator, thank you so much for joining us, not only for the broadcast program, which viewers can see on our website, but also here for our web extras. Thank you very much. Please thank the crew and the folks who helped set this up back in Washington, D.C. so late in the evening. And I look forward to seeing you next time you're back in Idaho.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us for this Dialogue Web Extra.